Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is Dr. Amanda Sharples from the University of Toronto. Thanks for being here today, Amanda.
Thank you for having me, Marianne. I'm happy to be here.
So before we jump into our topic, can you just tell the listeners who don't already know you about you? What are you teaching at the University of Toronto? Maybe how long you've been there, what your training is in, any information to give us context, please.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm a professor, assistant professor at the University of Toronto. I've been there for about 6 years now in a contractually limited term appointment. I actually did my graduate studies at U of T as well. So it's nice being there. I've been there consistently, and I teach a wide variety of courses. So I teach Introduction to Personality. I've been teaching that since 2018. I teach a lot of methods courses. So social psychology laboratories. I do a field methods laboratory as well. I've taught some statistics courses. Actually, one of the first courses I taught was a statistics course, and I really enjoyed that. I teach cultural psychology, which I also really enjoy teaching. In looking at wisdom, we can talk about cultural differences that you see there. So I think that's really interesting. And I teach a psychological measurement course. Quite a wide variety of courses. I've taught Intro to Social Psychology as well. So I really enjoy teaching. In terms of research, I have quite a mixed bag of, of projects that I'm working on. So I do some work looking at intergroup relations. I look at interpersonal relationships and conflict between parents following separation and divorce. And what's probably most relevant for what we're going to talk about today, I do some work looking at pedagogy, and specifically I'm interested in wisdom and wise reasoning and ways that we can cultivate that in the classroom.
Fantastic. And can you tell us, I was sitting here trying to guess, so do you have a clinical psych background or some social psych background that leads to teaching tests and measurement? Will you tell us?
Yeah, no, I do. Sorry, I should probably an important thing to mention. My background's in social psychology. So that's what I did all of my graduate work in.
All right, great. Thanks. But yes, as you previewed, you were here to talk wisdom because you are another one of the recipients of the Society for Teaching of Psychology's 2023 Instructional Resource Grants for a project called Cultivating Wisdom in the Classroom, Activities to Facilitate the Development of Wisdom in Psychology courses. We've been interviewing a lot of these grant recipients, and I'm excited to hear about wisdom because I study memory, so I wouldn't say 100% sure, but I am 99% sure I've never even thought about bringing wisdom into my classes. So for people like me, what can you tell us about what it means to bring wisdom into a classroom? And then if you want to talk about how you're trying to do it already and where you're going with the grant, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So I started thinking about this when I actually started teaching about wisdom as a construct. So in personality, when we talk about cognitive approaches to understanding individual differences, I teach about intelligence and IQ testing and kind of looking at the contentious history behind that and, what we know about the validity of these measures now. And I really wanted to bring in another construct. And I got really interested in wisdom. I started looking at the work that Igor Grossman was doing with some of his colleagues, studying wise reasoning specifically and looking at how to measure situational variability in wise reasoning. So I started teaching about this. And I'm coming at it more from a social perspective. There's cognitive perspectives to understanding wisdom as well. So I'm really looking at I consider the cognitive part of it as well as the social components. So, benevolence, empathy, concern for others. So in getting interested in it and starting to teach it, I thought, well, I wonder if there's ways we can actually develop these skills in students. And is anyone doing this? Is this something people have even thought about before? So I started doing some research. And of course, I came across, a number of articles. So Hewen and Grossman had a paper where they talk about different ways you can try to encourage wisdom in the classroom, kind of looking at reviewing the research, what we know about how to cultivate wisdom now. Ardelt as well. She's done some work with colleagues looking at how to teach wisdom and use wisdom in the classroom. And there's many other people I came across. I can't remember all of the names right now, but I was really, I thought it was really interesting, but we still have so much to learn about it because there's so many different tools you can use. So it's really kind of pinpointing like what are the right tools, what's going to work for students. So there is some evidence out there. I know a lot of the work, again, by Igor Grossman and colleagues is finding that self-distancing and taking a more objective stance when looking at difficult situations that would require wisdom may be very important, may be very useful for enhancing wise reasoning skills. Also things like, self-development and applying, for example, exemplars of virtuous behavior to our own lives and thinking about how their virtuous decision making and behavior and things that they've done can apply to our own lives, but also considering the situational variability, because one of the things that Hewen and Grossman argue in their paper was that it's not enough just to look at exemplars of virtuous behavior or wise behavior. We need to think about why they were wise in a given situation. Because another thing we know about wise reasoning is that there's a lot of within-person variability. We can all be wise in certain situations, but we aren't all wise all the time. And so it's kind of figuring out what are those social cognitive mechanisms that explain the situational variability and how can we develop those things in people and in students, really in the classroom, to encourage more wise decision making.
Great, thank you. So could you maybe give an example of something you would do in one of your courses? Like walk us through the brass tacks of like what a wisdom growing assignment or wisdom tapping assignment would look like.
Yeah, of course. So I did some work with an independent project student, undergraduate student, Jordan Bell. So he's kind of helping me in finalizing this teaching resource as well. And he was doing an independent project with me. So we developed an assignment, really. It wasn't really, it was more participatory, than anything. So every week, students would be given a set of behaviors that they could engage in. They didn't have to. And we had two different groups. So what Jordan did is he looked at this work on volitional personality change, looking at the big five traits. So agreeableness, openness to experience, extroversion, neuroticism, and conscientiousness. And we had two groups. So in one group, we used some of the behaviors that this research on volitional personality change had identified for conscientiousness. This was our control group because we figured these are still positive behaviors, but they're not necessarily things that would be related to wisdom. Things like being organized or organizing the apps on your phone or making a to-do list for the next day. And then we had our wisdom group. And what Jordan did is he actually took behaviors from agreeableness and openness to experience. And because we figured that those are the two personality traits that may best tap into wise behaviors. So with agreeableness, things like compassion, empathy, trying to, for example, identify a struggle or difficult experience somebody else is having and think about how you might feel if you were going through that experience. With openness, it's about, being able to engage with different ideas and opinions that are different from your own. So, wanting to learn about a new culture, for example, and their values and how they may differ from your culture, the values of your culture. So we put together these behaviors, and every week students would select new behaviors from the list and they would try to engage in them throughout the week. And then at the end, they complete a brief reflective survey where they talk about whether they did this, how they felt about it, what they feel they got out of that experience.
And I'm guessing students probably really like this assignment.
The students that gave me feedback gave me positive feedback. So I do think they did. I mean, it was easy, marks, right? Because it's just if you're doing it. But also a lot of students that did give me feedback commented that they felt it was very useful, like it was helpful for them in their day-to-day lives to do things like some of it was like mindfulness meditation. And again, some of it was perspective taking of what other people are going through. Again, learning about a new culture or thinking about an opinion that differs from your own. And they got to pick the behaviors, right? It's not like they were forced to do, one specific thing. They had quite a long list that they could choose from every week.
Great. Thank you. I think maybe I didn't know that some of these things fall under wisdom. So I feel a little better that I maybe am, I'm a secret wisdom assignments are happening in my classes. So that was helpful already. I think probably I was trained in a much more cognitive orientation for it. Because if you were to ask me, does wisdom have to do with things that might relate to mindfulness? I'm like, maybe, but it's really what you're thinking. So thank you for helping me see a bigger picture. You alluded in your introduction that you've been thinking about some of this in a cultural context. Again, I didn't tell you to research this beforehand, so just sort of what's readily available in your memory. But what are some things that you know about cultural differences and wisdom that might be interesting to listeners?
Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things. So kind of folk ideas about what wisdom is. These do seem to differ. There's some consistency across cultures, the idea that there's a benevolence component as well as an application of knowledge kind of component to it. But what is thought as most important varies a bit across cultures. So in some research by, again, Igor Grossman and colleagues, they looked at this and they found, I believe, I could be, I'm going to try my best to remember this, but they found they were comparing Chinese, Russian, and American participants. And I believe that the Chinese participants were emphasizing more looking at like positive exemplars, like looking at people that have lived wise lives and kind of studying them and their behaviors. I think with the Russian participants, it was more like self-reflection as part of wisdom. And I don't really remember off the top of my head what they found with the American participants. I should know these things because I teach it, but we teach so many things, right? But some other interesting things they found as well is that comparing Japanese participants and American participants at different ages. So they compared like young adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults. Specifically looking at young adults and middle-aged adults, they found that Japanese participants were demonstrating more wisdom than American participants. Likewise, when they look at social class, because we can think of that as a type of culture as well, they found that when you compare like working class individuals to like upper class individuals, they tend to demonstrate more wise reasoning, specifically with respect to interpersonal dilemmas. So kind of making decisions about other people they might know. So the logic there is that in, collectivistic cultures. So we know, for example, Japanese culture and East Asian cultures in general tend to be more collectivistic. And likewise, middle class, like working class cultures tend to be more collectivistic as well. So these are cultures that really emphasize relationships with others, caring for others, maintaining harmony with your social relations. Because interdependence is so crucial, people may be less self-focused and oriented more towards others. And we also know that a key way of to cultivate wisdom is to be less self-focused. And so maybe this orientation towards others is one of the reasons we see more wise kind of behaviors with these cultural groups.
So that's such an interesting tidbit. So now I'm like, my head is spinning and sort of thinking about then that these are playing out in the cultures of our classroom as well, right? If you're teaching more students from a working class background, first generation students, that they're going to come in with maybe a wisdom orientation than someone that's, I won't call them out, but I feel like I was in a meeting with a colleague once and he was like, I think I'm 5th generation college educated, right? So that we might need some faculty training if our faculty are, not coming from those backgrounds. So thank you for sharing that. I always like to give my guests a chance to talk about something either that they thought 3 minutes later, oh, I wish I had brought that up, or about something completely different. So Amanda, what would you like our listeners to know as a kind of a closer?
Yeah. Off the top of my head. Well, I think that some of the challenges when it comes to cultivating wisdom in the classroom are how do we, assess this? And also, you can't, force something onto somebody, right? Like people, again, even with the volitional personality change research that I talked about, typically in that research, these are people that actually want to change their personality. They come into the study saying, I want to be more conscientious or I want to be more agreeable. When I was doing this work with Jordan, like we were just telling them to do these things. We don't know that that's what they want to do. And indeed, we didn't really find, because we did measure wise reasoning in both groups before and after completing these tasks, and we didn't find significant differences. And so that could be part of it. And so I think it's important in implementing these things in the classroom to maybe target the kind of virtuous or wise behaviors students are most interested in developing. In some of the other work, research that's been done, they find that, really having people self-reflect and apply it to their own lives is important. And so also maybe getting people to think about what virtues do they want to develop? Are they more interested in intellectual humility, self-transcendence, perspective taking and compromise? So these things can be important. And there's so many different ways we can facilitate wisdom in the classroom. One thing I'm also working on now is these kind of choose your own adventure stories. That's something that I find really interesting. I love these tools like Twine that you can use online to create these. So I'm creating one. I'm trying to create one for different virtues. So I'm working on one for like deep honesty and integrity. So kind of using, I believe his name was James Burke. This is one of the stories that's been used in other research trying to facilitate the development of wisdom in the classroom. And he was the CEO at Johnson & Johnson when there was a big issue with 7 people had died because Tylenol bottles had been contaminated. People were putting cyanide in them. And so he, I believe, pretty quickly took all these bottles, like 30 some odd million bottles of Tylenol off the shelves, costing the company and their shareholders about $100 million. This was back in, like, I believe it was late 1970s. And, but this was seen as kind of an example of leadership and integrity and somebody doing the right thing, even at the expense of the shareholders, the company. And so I'm trying to do a version of this story where people can make choices, similarly, like have to make some kind of ethical decision or not, right? And kind of see the consequences of their actions and the various outcomes that can come from that. And then self-reflect in doing that. And I also think that reflection in general is a very important component of wisdom, and any of the activities that you have students do to cultivate these different virtues, they need to reflect on it and really think about how it applies to them. And I think another thing we can do, and we maybe don't even realize a lot of us are already doing as educators, because we really play a big role in kind of modeling these kind of wise behaviors for students, is demonstrate them. Intellectual humility is a big one, and it can be really challenging to do. But I think coming into the classroom and being honest about what you know and what you don't know, and being willing to admit when you're wrong, which can be very challenging to do in our positions where we are so focused on appearing competent all the time, is another important thing. And it can backfire, I think, depending on how you do it. I certainly try to always tell students when I'm more or less knowledgeable on the topics, right? So when I teach Intro to Personality, I'm teaching across a very broad array of subjects. So when I teach, for example, biological approaches or like things like epigenetics, I'll tell students, like, this is not my area. I'm going to do my best, but I don't know everything on this topic. And I've definitely had students that are like, well, she said she didn't know everything on this topic. And, fair enough. They expect us to be very competent and know things. But I think modeling intellectual humility and being able to respond to a student's question and saying, I don't really know the answer to that, but I can look into it. Those are the kind of things that can help as well. And I know it's an argument, I believe, that was also made in the article by Hewitt and Grossman, that, it's really about facilitating an environment where students feel like they can develop these wise behaviors and ways of thinking. And, we can't force it on them. There's no one tool that's going to do it. You want to create an environment where they have many different tools to do that for themselves.
Great. I'm so glad I asked. Thank you. Thank you for that additional contextual information. I've been talking today with Dr. Amanda Sharples from the University of Toronto. Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.